When we divide philosophy into ancient, medieval, and modern, there is a sort of little artificiality in this division. Philosophy essentially is one. In other words, it is the perennial search of humanity, man, for the meaning of human existence within the context of the universe. And the questions which we discuss in philosophy today in so-called modern times are not very different from the problems which the pre-Socratics tried to solve. Because their beginning, the pre-Socratic reflections were basically about what is the ultimate component, what is the basis of the universe, what is it out of which the universe is built? Also, how to explain the fact of change and becoming. How to try to locate oneself, the human being, within the context of the universe. So, the problems which we discuss nowadays essentially are not different. Nevertheless, there is, in different periods of time, a special tone, a special spirit, a special attitude which is prevalent for the mentality of seekers of meaning, the philosophers. Consequently, we can say, knowing that it is somewhat artificial, that there is ancient philosophy, medieval philosophy, and also modern. This lecture is about the beginnings and the basic orientation and the basic attitudes developed in modern philosophy. The word modern signifies sometime between 13th century and our times. But the beginning of the different attitude, mental attitude, was the turning away from believing something only to experimentation. The experiments done by Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, and others were opening new vistas, new ways of thinking, and new concepts of the world in which humans live. We know that Galileo was persecuted in a way. Copernicus was also on the so-called list of prohibited books and so on. The Christian community slowly only adapted itself to the new vision. The medieval picture of our world was that man is the center. The earth is the center of the universe, and man is on earth the center of the whole universe. With the development of microscopes and more powerful telescopes, the whole idea, the whole vision changed very radically. Today, for example, we know that our galaxy, our heliocentric galaxy, is very secondary, so to speak. Our Earth is not very significant in the immensity of what we call cosmos. We know about the tremendous, beyond any imagination, distances measured by astronomers in light years, and hundreds and thousands of light years are used by astronomers to designate different locations of galaxies, and what we see in the sky in the evening somehow became radically different. After Einstein especially, we know how much different things may seem. But in philosophy, the basic beginnings, the origin, so to speak, of modern thinking, modern philosophy, usually is connected with the name of Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes is in many books on the history of philosophy designated as the, so to speak, father of modern philosophy. Descartes lived between 1596 to 1650. After him, immediately, we have Spinoza, Locke, Leibniz, Berkeley, until Hume, Kant, and then again Hegel, Nietzsche, Husserl, Russell, Wittgenstein, and contemporary thinkers like Ayer, etc. Descartes, however, initiated the personal search for absolute truth. And his thinking, his philosophizing began with doubt. How do I know that what I was taught, let's say, he would say, by the Jesuits in La Flèche, how do I know where is the ground, the root of a conviction that what I believe, what I really maintain as true, is really absolutely certain, that there is no place for doubting really. Doubt, therefore, became the spring, the beginning of Descartes' reflections. His search was how to find some fact, some truth, which I cannot in any way whatever doubt, because he believed that if this is possible to find, then he will have the foundation of certainty in philosophizing. Otherwise, the doubts, possibilities, skepticism will have recurrent waves of attacking the mind. His basic desire was to conquer skepticism. Skepticism essentially is very old attitude. And going back to the pre-Socratics, going on, and the attitude is essentially can be characterized in one word. I know that there is no true absolute certainty. We have no ability, we have no possibility to know certain truth. A skeptic simply resigns from the very beginning from seriously looking for truth in life. Everything then dwindles into convention, relativity, and personal, shakeable, doubtable opinions. This is what Descartes wanted to conquer. So he was searching for some experience which, as we mentioned, does not admit any kind of real serious doubt anymore. That's how the idea of cogito ergo sum was born. I think, therefore I am, or I exist. I think, therefore I am. Thinking, therefore, became the foundation, the very indubitable, absolutely certain fact. Because no matter what I do, wherever I am aware, I am thinking. Thought cannot be, so to speak, doubted in any way, because even when I doubt, I am also thinking. Doubt is a form of thought. It's a mode of thinking. So thinking became the foundation of Cartesian building up of what is called Cartesianism, or the philosophy of Descartes. The question, according to Rene Descartes, is when can I have true, clear knowledge? He says, beside the fact that I think, the necessary condition is that my thoughts be clear, that I have clear definitions, what I am thinking about. What is the clear content of my thought? In order to accomplish, to get to such certainty, he applied so-called mathematical method. He wanted to use in philosophy mathematics and also not only in philosophy, but in science. Therefore, clarity of ideas, mathematical method, and the foundation cogito ergo sum. And on those premises, Descartes built his whole, so to speak, edifice, his philosophical vision. The essential questions, of course, are always beginning with the meaning of man. Wherever I am doing a serious philosophy, I have to answer the question first, who am I? What kind of an entity, what kind of a being am I? Second, what is the universe surrounding me? And in this context also, the question of God's existence develops. Are we alone in this universe? Or is there some divine reality, some God who is in some sort of relatedness, active relatedness to the world, including man? We must remember that Descartes was a Catholic. He believed in God, and he used to prove God's existence the known ontological, so-called ontological argument. The argument was already proposed centuries ago by Anselm. It is a way of thinking which purely on the idea of the mind, the very notion of the mind, intends to prove God's existence. God is the most perfect being there is. That's first premise. However, something that is most perfect must have existence, because existence is the perfection of all perfections. It's not only that something is considered to exist, but the most perfect being must necessarily exist. It is part of his being perfect. Therefore, conclusion, God exists. The argument has been thought and rethought by other thinkers quite often, but in general, we must say that there is no validity in this kind of argument. From the very idea or some notion or concept of God, which is very difficult idea, difficult concept, the idea of perfection absolute, to draw the conclusion that the highest perfection of something demands existence of this something. From thought, pure concept, to existing God, to reality, to infinite perfect God. Of course, this is very doubtful argument, to say the least. Many philosophers consider it simply not valid. However, according to Descartes, the argument is for him, anyhow, good, and he draws many other conclusions from the fact that God exists. For example, that God, being all good, would not deceive on purpose any human being, and so on. Coming back to the first statement, cogito ergo sum, according to Descartes, the human thought, or this by which we think, the human mind, is not material. And being not material, it is not subject to dimensions. It has no dimensions. But human beings also not only have minds, people also have bodies. And bodies occupy space. They are extended beings. Extension, therefore, for Descartes was the characteristic of material things. So in man we have the immaterial, non-dimensional, purely spiritual mind, and also the organism which is extended, res extensa in his mind, in Latin. Therefore, we have here a problem. Man seems to be somehow divided. The mind is one reality, not extended reality, purely immaterial spiritual self and mind, and also the material, tangible, sensibly experientiable human body with all the functions as res extensa. That means extended reality. And out of this concept we have the divided self. The problem of the relationship between matter and mind, so described by Rene Descartes, received a lot of consideration in modern thought, and it divides until this very day in our times different schools of philosophy. Those who opt for the more unity of the human being are also subject to reduce mental functions, thought, thinking, mind, to only epiphenomena of matter. On the other hand, the more spiritually inclined philosophers came to the conclusion even that man is no matter. Matter is only a projection of the human mind. Matter is only an idea in the mind. For example, Bishop Berkeley and many other forms of idealism. This divided self, therefore, is something again and again revisited, rediscussed, and it is one of the very essential problems of philosophical reflection on this until our days. With this problem, mind versus matter, matter versus mind, or how to unite them into one, the basic and fundamental problem of modern philosophy is the question of knowledge. What does it mean to know? What is knowledge? And in this area we have a gradual tendency to minimize the capacity of human beings to understand, to reach beyond the here and the now. It is a sort of dethronement, so to speak, of the power of the human mind. It, from Descartes, through Spinoza, and the others, until more and more modern times, philosophy arrived to David Hume, who completely negated the existence of self. One, second, that human beings can know the reality of the universe, and absolutely rejected the very possibility of transcending the sense data and reaching towards the absolute. So we have here atheistic skepticism. David Hume reduced all knowing to sense perceptions, and nothing else really is there. Sense perceptions which follow each other. Stream of sense perceptions. Man, in Humean philosophy, is nothing else but a bunch of sense perceptions, a bundle of sense perceptions. There is no self. And consequently, the influence of Hume is still very powerful until our times. Hume's philosophy, pure skepticism and denial of certain knowledge, besides sense data, influenced very much one of the greatest thinkers in modern times, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant, in his basic opus, his basic book, Kritik der reinen Vernunft, the critique of pure reason, denied the possibility of true metaphysics. According to Kant, any rational arguments for the existence of God, for example, based on what usually people understand knowledge, are impossible. the human mind is enclosed and encapsulated in the phenomenal horizon of experience. And consequently, rational arguments for God's existence are out for good. Of course, Kant, under influence of Hume, rejected also to a great extent the very possibility of getting out of this encapsulation in phenomena only. Back to Rene Descartes. According to Descartes, as we said, once he proved the existence of God, the ontological argument, developed a scheme of what we would say the universe. On top of it, above all, there is God, infinite substance. Infinite substance. Below that, we have mind and matter. Created finite entities. Human beings. Created finite substances. Mind as the basis for thought, and matter is the basis of extension. This thought and extension together in humans produces so-called attributes. Thought produces modes of thought or ideas. Extension is causing modes of extensions of created finite entities. Those are the basic two modes. The universe, therefore, in Cartesian philosophy, is a divided universe. God being the creator, on top, the infinite substance, but then we have all the way the great gap, so to speak, between mind, thought, ideas on one hand, immaterial, not extended, and on the other, matter, extension, and different modes of extension. We have a hierarchy of infinite substance, created finite substances, attributes of extension and thought, and modes of thought, ideas, modes of extension, different material entities. Descartes had, therefore, a tremendous influence on modern philosophy. As mentioned already, the problems which were raised by Kant, or perhaps sharply delineated by Descartes, still exist in our times. There are many schools in philosophy. Some philosophers think that actually there is no problem here, because, as mentioned already, they reduce man to matter only. Whatever happens, whatever man is, whatever he does, thought, reflection, or whatever, all is matter in movement and epiphenomena of matter. With this idea, of course, later on, the question in biology of evolution has been developed after the publication of Darwin's book in 1859 on the origin of species by means of natural selection. The idea of evolution gradually was stretched into other domains, not only in biology, but also on more and more areas, even on totality of reality. There are some thinkers who think that all the universe is nothing else but some sort of material evolution of matter in movement, development, and so on. Materialistic interpretation seems to be very sympathetic to the idea of evolution. But the idea of evolution is a very unclear idea until this very day. And by no means is it an absolutely certain idea. It is a theory, but only a scientific theory, and not all biologists agree with this absoluteness, quotes unquote, of evolutionary thinking and evolutionary interpretations. Descartes, therefore, developed and stressed very much the great division between so-called experimental sciences and metaphysical thinking. This division existed, of course, before him, but he stressed it. He brought it into more into focus of reflection. So now the question occurs, did Rene Descartes have a very deep influence on modern thought? The answer is absolutely yes. He is the beginner of the so-called rationalistic attitude or philosophical rationalism. After him, Spinoza, 1632 to 77, Locke, 1632, 1704, Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, and Berkeley. All this rationalistic, to a great extent idealistic, but also empiricistic thinking led gradually to more and more skepticism. It ended up, as already mentioned, with absolute skepticism of David Hume. We have here a sort of escape from reason. The mind, the reason, is gradually being, in a manner of speaking, dethroned. The depth of skepticism is probably most evident in the writings of David Hume. Later, very influential thinker, as already said, mentioned also, Immanuel Kant. And so we have the development here of the so-called modern mentality. The basic characteristic under the influence of Hume and Kant is that a number of philosophers denies absolutely any sensible talk about God, spirit, or any religion, and so on. Because knowledge in their minds is only what is discovered in the laboratory under the microscope or telescope or in specially devised experiments and scientific theories. And therefore, we are living in a sort of scientistic bias in our times. A number of very many people, even in our times, when they hear the word knowledge, they always identify it with scientific knowledge, experimental knowledge. And people who are not very much educated, when they hear the word science, they would believe anything. They are, so to speak, fascinated by the very word scientific or scient. The scientists are the great priests of truth for a number, quite big number of people, and this is nothing really very happy or positive in our times. Metaphysics, on the other hand, is practiced, of course, especially by Neo-Thomists. Metaphysics is still there. It will never disappear because philosophy by its very nature is metaphysical. It is the questioning, the seeking of the ultimate absolute foundation of all reality. Naturally, every human being in our times must somehow face those issues. We cannot hide behind so-called authorities anymore. Everybody who seriously is considering the importance of understanding himself, his place in this world, his beliefs, whether they are religious or moral or otherwise, or other, must do the search for himself, for herself. In our times, we need courage to think for ourselves. And when we start thinking, when we have the decision and the passion for thinking, the eternal problems will, of course, come back to us. Central problem will be the question of, does God exist? Can we truly, honestly believe that God is real, that he is not some sort of a wishful thinking, some projection of the unhappy humans in this life here and now. Perhaps he is nothing but an illusion. Now, there is only one way to solve the question. Study, inquire, think, reflect, and come to some vision of what is true and what is not true. The importance of the question of God's existence cannot be overstressed, because it has a direct connection to religion and also the mode of living, morals. If God exists, then the distinction between good and bad, wrong and right, the moral values acquire a tremendous importance in every individual's life. It is not only that God exists, because the essence of religion, which is connected with the problem of God's existence and founded, based on the conviction that God is real, religion is the very center of human decision-making, human values, direction of human life, the whole position in the scheme of reality of each individual person. In religion, the question is not only of the here and the now, my life between the birth and grave, which is short, of course, but also the problem of eternity. It is religion which answers such questions like, is there any life after the grave? Is man more than just matter? Living but only matter? Is it true that there is a spark of divine in man, spirit, eternal, created by God, for eternal company with God? Is man really loved by the infinite, omnipotent Creator? That's one. On the other hand, if God's existence is an illusion, then naturally we must get rid of religion or simply ignore it. Let it die its own death. It simply belongs, as many would say today, atheists, materialists, and so on, skeptics, that religion was important, some perhaps in the past, when man just was developing in a very early form, and to shield himself from the fear of terrible nature surrounding him, the terrible brutish short existence here in an unfriendly and hostile universe, man excogitated some sort of divinity, some sort of divine father, so to speak. This is the great divide between human beings today. Nothing really divides more, in a deeper way, one man or woman from another man or woman, because it divides the very foundation and the very sense and the very meaning, if any, of existing as a human being, as human in this world. We already said before in previous lectures that philosophy can be defined perhaps in a very good way by saying that it is a search for meaning. Philosophy is the search for finding the very dynamism of my existence, the value, the worth of my existing in this world, with my limitations, with the problems of everyday life, with my aging and the certainty of dying. Coming back to Rene Descartes, we must remember that he was a believer. For him, the question of God's existence was settled. God really exists. And therefore, he had no problem, although the argument which he developed, the ontological argument, certainly is a weak argument, to say the least. For him, however, it was a solid foundation. When it comes, however, to human beings, the very center of certainty, clarity, vision, and truth is the fact of thinking. I think, therefore I am. This statement of Descartes, of course, can be questioned too. But we cannot take it too lightly. It is true. Whenever I am aware what I am doing, where I am, and so on, there is always the presence of thought. The mind, therefore, is reality which is beyond any doubt. Because doubting even, or making the statement that I cannot know anything, presupposes an individual person who is saying something meaningful. That means that there is a mind active there in this very statement. Even negation of knowledge is a statement of knowledge. I know that I don't know. In other words, in order to say it meaningfully, in any sense, I have to have some knowledge. Complete denial of thought and reflection and knowledge is simply impossible. It is possible, perhaps, as a theoretical fashion, but not real for real serious existence. skepticism is not a viable option for any soundly thinking human being. So modern philosophy gradually, as we saw, went through all those gradual skeptical attitudes. It does not mean that all those philosophers were atheists. Leibniz was not an atheist, Bishop Berkeley was not, David Hume was, Immanuel Kant was not an atheist, although he rejected metaphysics and the rational arguments for God's existence, which I mentioned in the lecture when discussing the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, going back even to Aristotle. Kant also rejected the ontological argument. But not only the ontological argument, Immanuel Kant rejected also all arguments, rational arguments proving God's existence, because he denied the validity of metaphysics. In this sense, he certainly was not on the right track. Neither was David Hume. With this development of doubt, lack of solidity in thinking, we come to development of what we would call perhaps the modern atheism. People like Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Bertrand Russell, all are atheists. So, atheism, modern atheism, is a kind of resignation from metaphysical inquiries and option for atheistic interpretation of reality. It is difficult to understand the seriousness of moral values in case if someone is an atheist. Like Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of the greatest Russian writers, used to say, if God does not exist, everything is allowed. Because the question whether something is right or wrong, evil or good morally, is gone. What really is essential is what is convenient, what brings desired results, and therefore the veneer of morality is really nothing else but a very shallow coverage, so to speak, of absolute pragmatism, materialistic atheism in practice. In modern times, we also talk about so-called existential thinkers. And the father of existentialism is usually quoted, Kierkegaard, the Dane. Kierkegaard rejected the systematic, rational proofs for God's existence, especially as developed by Hegel. Kierkegaard is known from this famous saying of the leap of faith. You have to make an act of faith, an act of commitment in your life, because you are a creature of God. And absolute faith is necessary condition for your salvation. Rational arguments, doubts, and all that are out. The leap of faith is the only real attitude possible. Existentialists in general reject any kind of rational system building in philosophy. They don't believe it is possible. And naturally, the question of what is knowledge is still very, very hotly discussed in philosophy in our times. We are, as already mentioned, there are many thinkers who believe that really and truly knowledge only is scientific knowledge. A scientist must have something always tangible, measurable, somehow given in experience of some sort, or else there is no real knowledge. We forget sometimes that scientific theories are certainly very true. They have a high degree, but only of probability. Science never gives us absolute certainty and truth. Something that Rene Descartes, the father we were discussing tonight of modern philosophy, wanted somehow to find in his search. The foundation of all absolute, indubitable truth. Science, dealing with phenomena only, and all the other positivisms and so on, can never give us what Descartes was after. Scientific theories come and go. What was scientifically true, let's say, quotes unquote, some number of centuries in the past, is no more true in our times. We have no absolute reason to believe that all scientific insights we have today will not be perhaps discarded in the future with the progress of scientific tools, methods, and so on. Therefore, Rene Descartes who did respect very much science, would not be really satisfied without metaphysical inquisitions. And as already explained, the great divide which he stressed in his philosophy are constantly being discussed and rediscussed